Hello and welcome to the first Global Healer Zone Facebook Live video, and we've tested it out a few times and it seems to work, but let's see how it goes right now. So first of all, my name is Harun Rabbani. I'm one of the supporters, advocates, ambassadors for Global Healer Zone, which was founded by our good friend Jen Tiller. And if you look at the state of the world right now, you will find that there is an awful number of people, I'm talking about a horrendous number of people who are going through suffering, basically. And there are way more people suffering than there are healers and therapists who can basically help them to get over their suffering. So in this series of videos, which is every Tuesday, approximately 12 p.m., give or take a couple of minutes, every Tuesday, we're going to have a guest an expert, who's a fellow healer, a therapist, who is going to help you to become better at what you do, share stuff so you can reach out to more people, number one, to reach into yourself. So one of the biggest areas, of course, is certainly something that I've helped others. One of the big areas is the inner child healing. So yesterday I was at an event with Dr. Gabor Mate, who's written a number of books on the inner child. Absolutely mind-blowing. So I think it's totally fortuitous. I think I'm very blessed to have an highly experienced therapist with over 30 years of experience working with trauma and inner child work. Her name is Susanna Sweeney. She's with us. Susanna, hello, welcome. Nice to have you there. How are you?
Hi, Harun. Lovely to meet you, and thanks so much for having me.
You're welcome. Well, you're the very first guest here, and hopefully over time this just takes off, because the idea is, as healers and therapists, I have to say, I'm going to be outright, because I'm from the medical industry, particularly medical devices. The worst thing you can do is try to outcompete each other and try to outsell each other. That shit does not work. In order for us to really make a difference using our own gifts is to cooperate, collaborate. Now, collaborating with others is one thing, but if our own body is not cooperating, collaborating with itself, it's going to be dis-ease. So do you want to share with the audience why specifically is the inner child work important? Well, what is the inner child trauma? I mean, you fire away and tell me.
Yeah, great question, Harun. So let me start from the beginning, which really was 1992, when I started working with trauma survivors. And during the next 5 years, I had a very steep learning curve. And that learning curve was, the assumption was that talk therapy, talking about things, that could help people change their lives. Right? Now, over the next 5 years, what I was to see a lot of was that, yes, talking is helpful to a certain extent. You have a witness, somebody who can, be there for you, empathize with you, build a connection with you. That part is really, really helpful. And especially for people who've experienced trauma in their adult lives, and, maybe it wasn't responded to appropriately. They didn't have the social support in place. So that part is very helpful, but it doesn't deal with the symptoms. And that's what I kept seeing again and again, that really in the end of the day, after a couple of years, after a year, people were dropping out and they were getting frustrated because essentially they were still feeling really bad about themselves. They still had that anxiety. They still, had the disturbing trauma symptoms. They may have lessened to a degree, but at the core, they were unchanged. So that set me off on a long search of looking at other ways of working. And that really wasn't easy. When you come in with that psychotherapy mindset, it's not made easy for you. right? But to cut a long story short, I started working with Havening Techniques a couple of years ago only. And that's where that really profound change starts to happen. So on one hand, right, I have that recognition that I saw from my work with clients all these years. Changes don't happen until you address the deeper underlying material, which is most of the time from childhood.
Yeah.
And it's only, that's where the juice is, really. And once you move that, that's when you really start getting substantial relief from symptoms. And then on the other hand, I'm now doing that much faster, much more profound, right? And my model that I'm using, which is the reparenting model, it just helps me to target things much, much faster. And so I'm delighted you went to see Gabor Mate. He would be very big in the field. Obviously, he is one of my heroes. His approach is very compassionate, and I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, it was interesting because I had a high-level academic sat next to me in the audience, and a professor from one of the local universities. I won't give away too much. And she's going through her own stuff as well. And one of the things she noticed during Gabor Mate's talk is that it's like training a dog. If we talk about the inner child, but what people forget to mention are the parents. And so we've got a dog, and your dog is only going to be reflecting who you are. So if your dog's chaotic all over the place, guess what? So dog training is actually, and I've watched quite a few videos on this, dog training is actually about training the human.
Yeah.
And childhood trauma starts off by training the parents. So, okay, so let's narrow this down. It's so important to narrow this down. What are the consequences because everyone's traumatized to some degree. We know that, this is part and parcel of being human. What are the consequences of a therapist, a healer, a doctor, it doesn't matter what discipline they are? They're doing their work. On paper, they do all the right things, but they've got that inner trauma, this neglected child. What are the consequences of not doing the childhood work?
It's a really good question, Harun. And that's exactly what I kept seeing in my work all these years, that unless you address that trauma from many years ago, the symptoms don't go away. So what we are seeing a lot of as therapists and healers in our practices is people who come in with symptoms such as chronic pain, right? Very, very mysterious kind of thing, very difficult to work with. Anxiety, absolutely huge these days, right? And now there may have well been events in adulthood that made this worse. But what happens is, unless you address the root of it, the material which will also have been triggered by the events in adulthood, unless you deal with that and make it settle, the symptoms stay the same, they don't go away. And that's what we're seeing everywhere. There are people who go to therapy for 10 years. There are people who are hopelessly stuck in living with chronic pain, and they've accepted that, nothing works for them, and that's the reality they live in. And really, I believe from my work that the solution is in looking back, and not for the sake of it, not for the sake of it, but simply because you must work through that material. Otherwise, you're not going to get symptom relief. It's as simple as that. And I suppose that's what I'm here to raise awareness about today in a simple enough way. It's a huge topic. There's a lot of prejudice about childhood trauma that I have seen in the hypnosis world, in the healing world, and I want to open people's minds to that.
So we're going to come to that in a moment. It just reminds me, so as a professional speaker, I'm a therapist and healer and so on. I've developed my own system. But as a professional speaker with over 20 years experience, here's what I found. Early days, we used to focus on delivering whatever content the audience is asking for or paying for. But then, I don't know, about 10, 12 years ago, I started seeing a lot of people being trained to go on stage and be open and vulnerable. But what I found was they're on stage using the audience as their therapist. In other words, I'm sharing my sob story so that you can listen, feel sorry for me, buy my product, etc. And I think a very big danger of somebody who's holding trauma, trying to do work with somebody who's got maybe similar or the same trauma, is your prejudice from yourself is going to kick in, number one. Number two, very likely you're going to be triggered as well. Number three,
that happens,
distorted.
Harun. You're addressing a pet issue of mine, which is that personal work, you know, in reality, it will really, really boost your client work. When you work on yourself, you make yourself more available for your clients. You're going to be able to be present to them in a whole new, different way if you're dealing with your own issues.
So what kind of prejudices have you noticed? You mentioned prejudices.
Yeah. So, you know, so some of the things I would have heard are that if you're dealing with, you know, if you're insisting on childhood trauma, you know, it always comes up about the ACE study and the ACE study was a study into childhood trauma. And people are constantly finding fault with it. To me, when I look at the ACE study, it doesn't even cover everything. It just covers the worst of it. It covers the major trauma flags. It doesn't even address the subtle stuff, the stuff of everyday life. So the stuff that is so pervasive that you hardly notice as a child because you will always normalize what you're living with. So your own family is the only place you know. So of course, this is going to seem normal when dad is rejecting, when mom is never emotionally available, when there's maybe alcohol in the house and certain things happen that might not be violence, it might be outright violence, but emotionally it can be equally as damaging. And
Go ahead.
so the clients that I get, I see that all the time. All the time. They're starting out with, I haven't a clue why I'm anxious. It's a mystery. And then when we dig down into how they grew up, this is the kind of material that surfaces, and it's often very subtle.
You know, it's
not the kind of stuff you would call the police for.
No.
But, you know, it goes on. I mean, think about it. During childhood, that's when we're being conditioned for life. That's when we're being programmed, and we're wide open until the age of 7 to absorb any programming at all, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it will affect very deeply because you will absorb the good stuff, but you will also absorb when things go wrong.
Yeah. So yeah, currently or recently, massive headline news worldwide about Amber Heard and Johnny Depp.
Right.
About domestic violence. And me being someone who's been a psychologist since I was a kid, meaning trying to understand why people think and behave the way they do, I'm actually looking, well, what happened in childhood? And they actually said it. Johnny Depp grew up in an environment where his mother was very alcoholic, extremely abusive to her husband, his father, towards his sister, and so on. And the last thing he wanted to do was ever be in a relationship with someone like that. That was his big fear. So he obviously, you know, is hiding away. And Amber Heard also grew up with a very abusive father. And so what's happened? They both magnetize each other. And
great example. And they end up replicating exactly what they grew up with.
Yeah.
Because that's so familiar. It feels so familiar on a subconscious level. I mean, you don't make a conscious decision to walk into a situation like that. But, you know, decisions are mostly made on an emotional level, and it will be that feeling of familiarity that makes them walk right into that situation that they always wanted to avoid, because the deeper material hasn't been addressed.
So what's the consequences of actually doing inner work? So in terms of the people who come to you, what are the consequences? But just think in terms of therapists and healers who we're addressing here. How will that affect them on all areas of life that you can share with us in a few moments?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, the clients who come to me now, I really specialize in symptom relief, right? So they would always come with a long list of disturbing symptoms. So it could be anxiety, it could be low mood, it could be lack of esteem, lack of confidence, it could be chronic pain. It's usually a mixture of all of these and more. And so during my reparenting program, we're taking that apart. And things start happening when we go into that really, really old material that they were, to start with, they were barely aware of that. It gradually comes up bit by bit. And when we're taking that part and discharging that essentially, and Havening, you see, is built on neuroscience. So it's very, very effective. And you achieve a lot in a short period of time. And when those are dealt with, that's where the symptom relief starts. So typically, you realistically, of course, it would be unethical to promise symptom relief, right?
No, you can't. You know.
Do that. But by and large, the people who come to me would have either a much reduced intensity of symptoms by the end of the program, or the symptoms would all be gone. So then,
go ahead.
So then their quality of life changes. So they can go in, ask their boss for a raise because they value themselves better, and they were never able to do that before, right? And they can go for a better quality relationship because they value themselves better.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so things, so it's actually very practical and very pragmatic, and it's very gritty, right? This is the real stuff. It's about finances, it's about love in your life, and whatever other aspects of really being able to enjoy life to the full. So that's the kind of stuff I'm after. That's what I just love about my work when I get there with people.
I think also what it does, I've got ADHD, and I'm okay with that, and so I'm actually a perfect person to be interviewing people anyway, which is this. In terms of energetic terms, spiritual terms, of course, if you're operating from this low vibration of anxiety, shame, guilt, or whatever it is, imposter syndrome is a very big one. And
yes,
by releasing on that, which is working with yourself, and it's not minor, it's actually quite, I know you're underplaying it, of course you have to, but I can say it because I've seen that happen firsthand. You're lifting their worth, the vibration, and so the quality of people, it's all about relationship, your relationship with your body, your relationship with money, relationship with work, all of that shifts. Okay, so we've only got a few minutes in this, and there's a very good reason, because it's lunchtime and so on. So what tips or ideas can you give people now, therapists and healers, that they could implement, apply, think about, that can help them start the shift process? And we'll talk about how they can get in touch with you as well in a moment.
Yeah. So, well, I have given you some social graphics that I use, and they actually contain really worthwhile information. It's mainly, I think the first step is really awareness raising, and it's saying to people, look, you might have heard all the myths that childhood trauma doesn't matter, right? That inner child trauma, doesn't matter. It's just a fancy thing in the psychotherapy world. You don't really need to deal with that. You can deal with energy or spirits or whatever it is that you're working with. And those things might be very helpful, but to really get to the gritty issues, more often than not, all I can say is that I have found that doesn't happen until you deal with the deeper material. And to just also broaden people's awareness of how widespread it is. So when you see people who come into you with odd symptoms or constant pattern repetition, walking from one destructive relationship into the next, or being constantly unhappy, most likely there is something there from childhood that hasn't been addressed. So just to bring that awareness in, and on the graphics, there are some parental behaviors. It's not an exclusive list by any means, but some parental behaviors that can cause this kind of thing. There are some of the effects that you can observe in your clients that very likely lead back to inner child trauma. And there are some of the results that you can get when you deal with it. And of course, like, I'm a big promoter of Havening. I'm a Havening practitioner and Havening trainer. And when you work with methods based on neuroscience, it's going to be very effective. So if practitioners find that they come across this a lot in their practice, then I would say to them, it's really worthwhile to train in some method along these lines. So tapping, fits into that as well. That would be a predecessor to Havening. EMDR is a predecessor to Havening. They're all good methods. Of course, I swear by Havening because it's the newest, it's the fastest, it's built on recent neuroscience. But anybody, even the tapping or the EMDR, it would bring you a little bit further and being able to support your clients and help them to actually resolve this material.
So let's do this. If you want a copy of this PDF with all these ideas and tips that can get you started on the journey, and I'm sure many of you, I'm not sure if there's any of you, but I know many of you probably already started. If there's any of you who've done all your childhood work and you've cleared all your crap, come and talk to me. You can be my guru. But other than that, I don't think anyone's done that as yet. So I think if you want a copy of this PDF, best thing to do is comment below and Susanna will send you the link. I think that's the best way.
Well, actually, Harun, remember I emailed it to you. So if you want, I would say just upload it to the files in the group if you want.
Okay, good.
And people can get it from there.
Okay, good.
And it's actually in the group. Right?
Okay, we can do that. So just comment below anyway, and
I'd like to comment on the guru thing, right?
Yeah.
So here's another thing. So when you come to the bottom of dealing with childhood trauma, what you will find is that there is a certain amount of it that will shape personality. So that amount won't move, right? So there's a part of it that is you, that has formed you, that has formed your habits. But what we can do is we can make life much more enjoyable for you, and we can dismantle those awkward symptoms, the imprint from the past, the chronic stress essentially that's caused by that. And life on that side becomes a whole lot more enjoyable, a whole lot more fun, and just better all around.
Okay,
and
so
it's not about perfection. It's not about pathologizing and saying, you must do this, or you must forgive, or you must this. I hear that a lot too in the healing world, and my approach is much more that these things happen when the time is right.
Allow it to happen.
You can force them.
Absolutely.
So also just that acceptance that we are who we are, and that's okay. That's part of our journey as well.
Okay, so thank you ever so much, Susanna. How can people get in touch with you should they want to pursue things with you?
Yeah, so, well, I have a Havening training coming up in July. I have already advertised that in the group, and I will do so again. So that's an option for those of you who might feel ready to take that next step into supporting clients on a deeper level. Other than that, you can contact me through my website, which is the Online Hypnotherapy Clinic. And the email there is, what is the email? It's contact@Online Hypnotherapy Clinic. That will get me. Or simply through Facebook Messenger. That's okay too. Pop me a Facebook message and I will get back.
Okay, so what I would recommend people is to contact Susanna directly. What I would urge people to stop doing, and I'm going to say this again and again, stop advertising on Global Healer Zone. Here's why. No one's listening to you. There are 90% of people who come onto Global Healer Zone, therapists, members, are advertising, and 99.9% of the adverts don't even get any kind of engagement or response, let alone any clients. It doesn't work. You treat, unless you got a specific reason, nobody joins Global Healer Zone to buy anything. Zero buyers, but everyone's coming in to sell stuff. Don't sell stuff. Here's what you do. Start the conversation going. This is why we're doing this interview. It's not just for the fun of it. I enjoy interviewing, of course, because I can, I'm a skeptic in a very positive way. So this is why we're doing the interviews, is to say, okay, let's learn more about what you do, not what you sell. No one gives a shit what you sell. What is it that you can do for fellow members? And having been a networker of over 20 years, one thing I can say is Global Healer Zone is not your market, it's your route to market. So for example, I help people with type 2 diabetes. I'll help people with Global Healer Zone for sure. I don't want them to buy anything from me unless this is their last port of call. And then it's like, okay, I've got very highly engaged, highly committed people. Otherwise, it's a waste of energy. So anyway, thank you so much, Susanna. Next week, we have the absolutely lovely Lisa Pearson. Lisa is a very successful entrepreneur, a mompreneur, and a therapist also. And she's going to share stuff which will help all our viewers, our listeners, our members to really transform their business, their practice. And maybe, I don't know what her answers are going to be yet, as I didn't know what Susanna's are going to be. So we've got some very big questions to ask about how does somebody with a family situation run a successful business. Thank you all for watching. Please feel free to share to your network, etc. Susanna, once again, thank you very much for being our very first guest.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. I
You're
really
welcome.
enjoyed it. So best of luck with the interview series.
Thank you so much. Bye.